Welcome to the Misbehaving in Literacy podcast, where two literacy professors explore literacy and literacy education issues through the lens of humor. We have in common a passion for helping young children become literate and empowering their teachers to do what's best for children and not what's best for administrators, state education agencies, and politicians. Today, we have the immense pleasure of talking with Dr. Stephen Graham, Regents Professor in the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Graham. We are delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you for asking.
Yes, go ahead. We're so happy to have you.
I was just saying thank you for asking me.
So we asked you here today as literacy educators and researchers and frequent observers in elementary classrooms that we are interested in making sure that there are authentic and meaningful writing acts occurring in every classroom every day. We also want our pre-service teachers to be prepared to teach writing. We both recently read your meta-analysis chapter in the Handbook of Writing Research and appreciate the recommendations you provide, especially the first one, which is write. So we'll just dig into some of the questions. I'll get you started here. So based on your research, what are the most impactful instructional practices teachers should prioritize?
Well, I think of this in kind of 5 ways. And, let me start by saying, I'm sharing with you what the evidence would suggest, okay? But the evidence is varied. And in my case, I would include, quasi-experimental studies, true experiments, etc., but also single case design studies, and in some instances, qualitative studies looking at what exceptional teachers do when teaching writing. I think the more information comes together, the better we can rely upon it in terms of making decisions. I tend to think about this around 5 basic elements. And you already mentioned one of them. Kids need to write. Okay. Now, 6 months ago or a year ago, I would have cited the evidence that suggests just increasing students' writing results in better writing quality. What we do know is that increasing elementary grade students' writing can increase their reading comprehension, but we don't seem in our most recent meta-analysis to get a boost from just writing. Now, with that said, we do know that when you write about things that you're learning, you understand them better. When you write about stuff that you're reading, you understand it better. And obviously, if you're going to teach anything in writing, you need to have a place to apply it. And it's kind of like, I used to play basketball when I was in high school. I didn't so much care for, being there early in the morning at 6:30 for drills and practices, but it made you better to be in the game. And the game was playing basketball, and the game here is writing. And so if you take that out of the mix, you have a problem. Yeah. And so that's one thing. I think kids need to write. And, I can't give you an exact amount of time, but if I was pressed, I'd say at least 30 minutes a day, at least that, across the school day, and it could be more. And I would also put in there 30 minutes for instruction as well. So a total of an hour I'm going to say that as a minimum. That's not what we see, but that's what I'd recommend. Also, we can make writing more effective for kids by supporting them as they write. So, using something like a graphic organizer to help them gather their ideas and organize them before they write can be very powerful for them. It improves the quality of their writing. Likewise, having kids read material before they write, to gain information, and particularly when we move to the third point I'd like to make is teach, particularly when we teach them procedures or strategies for doing that. And so we want to be sure kids write. We want to support them as they write. Feedback would be another example of this, but we also want to teach. And when I say teach, there's a lot of things we could teach here, and we could waste some of our time. I'll give an example of this. There's a rule in spelling called the twining or twinning rule. I never can figure out how it's pronounced, because I've only seen it in print. I've never heard anybody say it before, so I'm not exactly sure. But it's this really complex rule that you would never teach anybody. So if you have 3 syllables and you add on a suffix that begins with a vowel, then there's a doubling rule. But it depends upon where the stress is placed, whether it's on the second or the third syllable. So, nobody's ever going to learn a rule like that, and there's no need to. So, we want to be efficacious about where we spend our time. And so, if I had to pick 3 areas, I would say, 1, we want to make sure kids master the foundational writing skills like transcription, spelling and handwriting and typing. And that needs to become as automatic and fluent and for spelling correct as possible. Second, and this isn't emphasized in most state standards or in, say, the Common Core state standards, we want students to become facile in terms of sentence construction. Now, the good news about the first 2 I'm mentioning here, when you teach spelling, word reading gets better, and we have evidence that reading comprehension gets better. When you teach sentence construction skills, often reading fluency gets better because students learn those sentence structures and they recognize them more readily when they're reading. So, that kind of double whammy is really good. And then we want to be sure that we teach kids strategies for planning, revising, and editing text. And when we talk about that, we're really talking about not single strategies for the most part, particularly for planning. They need to be genre specific. That's where we get our biggest bang for our buck. Now, something like brainstorming, every kid needs to know how to brainstorm to get ideas. But when we're developing a persuasive text, we want them to generate ideas around the basic elements that you use to construct an argument. A fourth thing, and I've really kind of touched on this, so I won't say a lot about it, we want to connect reading, writing, and learning better than we do now. And so I gave some examples of reading and writing. But one of the things that's really clear and makes writing a possibility across the school days, when we write about material that we're learning in class, we understand it better and we remember it better. This goes across science, social studies, and math. And then finally, this is taken from the study of exceptional teachers and what they do when they teach writing. We want to create an environment which young writers can thrive. They can take risk. Writing is valued. They see their teachers write. They're really, in a sense, part of a supportive community. So that would be my 5 things: write, support, teach, connect, and I'm having a brainstorm, a brain freeze on this last one. Create, where we want to create a conducive environment.
Yeah. I love those 5. If we could do all of those, I think we would be in a really good position. And I love what you said about the environment. I've recently been looking a lot at first graders and sharing their writing and what that means and how important. That's a step that I think a lot of teachers kind of skip, like, oh, we don't have time to share. But that's what you do with writing. You share it. And it values them, and it values their knowledge and their language and their culture, and they feel good about themselves, and they get feedback from their peers, and it's such a joyous thing to watch, when they're part of that community.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they get to see like what more concretely, like what delivering to an audience is like, rather than just writing something for the teacher to read later and grade. Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, those are really good points.
Love those points. So as you kind of look around what's happening in the writing landscape, what are some positive trends you have seen? So, we hate to focus on all the negative and what's not going on in classrooms. What are some things you have seen, or some of these practices you've seen, some of these exceptional teachers?
So one of the things we've been involved either in 3 ways of thinking about what's happening in the classroom. One of those is randomly selecting teachers from across, say, the U.S. and surveying what they're doing towards the end of the year. Now, the problem with that is you're having to reconstruct, and there's a tendency to inflate a little bit, right? Teachers are smart. When you ask a question, they know that you think that's important, so they don't want to say they never do it. So you have to be a little cautious with that kind of survey data.
Yes.
We've also been observing teachers who teach writing. Now also inflates the situation because there are some teachers who are not doing that. But the problem with observing is they know you're coming. So,
Right.
you get the best, they're usually going to give you their best shot. And then the other way we've been approaching this is we've been asking teachers to use an app. And each day we might have like 11 things listed. You might have something like sentence construction, or students wrote text longer, a paragraph or shorter, or they did a summary. And they click on one of those things and then it goes to another thing. It takes about 5 minutes to do. And when we've done that with teachers across the year, we're getting about 3 days a week, they're filling that out. Now, one every 3 days, they're not teaching writing when we've used that with middle school and secondary teachers, but they are doing stuff with writing on the other days. And so that's good. In terms of like the overall picture, we see some teachers and some schools do a phenomenal job. Kids are writing a lot. They're writing for different purposes. Teachers are applying evidence-based practices, and they're doing them quite frequently. And for kids in their classrooms who are not doing well, they're making adaptations, whether that's extra instruction, changes in the writing assignment, or so forth. That's really great.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we're not seeing that as the predominant vision of the landscape. And one of the things that we typically find is that when we ask teachers about their preparation, they're not always very positive about it, and they're particularly not positive about the academy or academia, their college presentations. Now, that differs somewhat, from survey to survey, from country to country, but I'd have to say I'm a university professor. I work in a school of education. I have to say we could do a better job.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of our questions for you. Because we noticed the same thing. We have a lot of us will have reading courses or what we call literacy courses, but really they're just reading courses, and there's not a lot of time for writing. So what are some ways you've tried to address that to prepare our pre-service teachers?
Well, so I'm going to approach it in a slightly different way, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Answer the question that you want, not the question that you're asked, is my basic.
Okay.
Although I will answer the question.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I was in college, I went to a small college in Georgia on the Georgia-Florida line it wasn't a university, it was Valdosta State College. But they had a fairly large, about 5,000 students. They had a fairly large school of education, and I was a history major. But language is really difficult for me. I lived 6.5 years in France as a kid, and I flunked French in college, which was really hard to explain. And so to get out of the French courses, I found that I could take education courses. I could be a history education major, still take all my history courses and take the education course. And all I had to do at the end of my 4 years was to teach in the high school that I went to high school in, which was an interesting proposition in and of itself. But one of the things that I noticed is that in my education courses, and I'd like to say that this is not the case anymore, I didn't really learn much about teaching. I learned a lot about theory and other kinds of things, but, in terms of the nuts and bolts of getting down and, how to teach somebody to read or how to teach somebody to write or to mathematics, I didn't know anything. Literally, I didn't pick up hardly a thing. So when I finished my undergraduate degree, I headed for the beaches in California from Georgia, spent about 6 months hitchhiking around the country, and ended up as a repairman in Georgia again, and decided that's probably not what I want to do for the rest of my life, is to work on fixing up trailers when they're falling apart. And so I worked on a master's degree in special education. And the special ed part got a lot of instructional stuff, but the reading courses I took, I didn't feel like I knew how to teach reading. So you can see what one of my suggestions is going to be. I think we could do a better job in literacy generally. And I'm not speaking to individual schools or individual professors, but I think we could do a better job of teaching people how to teach. The second thing is with writing, we don't devote any time to it. You know, if you had asked me during my master's program, where did I learn anything about writing? I don't remember a single class.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think those are our two biggest issues. Time is one, and it's really at a premium in undergraduate and master's programs. But at a basic minimum, we need at least one course, and I would suggest probably more than that. And we don't want to squander what we do in that course to prepare teachers. You know, I love theory, I love research, but the reality is if you're going to be a teacher, you need know-how. So that's kind of my take is know-how and time.
Right.
Yeah. Very,
Yeah.
those are very good points.
Yeah, I know I've tried to for my early, well, it's called a reading course. We still call our courses reading courses, but early reading course for this summer, I've moved some things around and plan to devote more hours of instruction in that course to writing, because I want my students to understand that they're reciprocal and, you know, they need to implement some writing instruction, and I want them to feel like they're ready. And the same in the fall when I teach my course where they work with students, you know, that we'll have reading phonics and reading and, you know, letter work, but we're also going to do some writing. And like you said, use books to respond to with those first graders they work with. So yeah, it's definitely something I think we need more of.
I did a writer's workshop with my reading methods class this semester, to where we did like this, you know, the big five and the pillars of reading, but every class we did a writer's workshop where we would read a book or a poem and do a mini lesson, and then they would have some writing time. And they didn't really like sharing their work, but I made them share their work.
You know, I want to reinforce what you just said, though. At Arizona State, where I'm at now, I haven't taught any literacy courses because I basically teach students, doctoral students. But when I was at Vanderbilt University, I was able to get a course in the special ed department. I was in special education department then. And we ended up with teachers from teaching and, you know, pre-service teachers from teaching and learning and other places in the thing. And I kind of did like you did. You know, I modeled what I wanted students to do. And so, like, let's say something like I wanted to teach a word sorting activity for spelling. I would model that with words that they didn't know that would fit particular patterns that I want to learn, so that they could see what this looks like when they put it in place in their class. And then when I model, then they had to do it with a peer so that they got some practice. And I think that's not always easy to do. And then it's even works better when you have a practicum connected with that. I used to be I used to be at University of Maryland, and I taught reading courses there, and each course had a practicum. And so students had to do 4 or 5 lessons that they had to develop in the course that I had to give feedback on, and they had to get approval from the teacher. It ended up being a lot of work because there were 40 or 50 students in each class.
Oh, wow.
But on the other hand, you know, there was a direct connection between what we did in class and what they did in their practicum situations. And so, you know, that's an expensive endeavor for universities. But that's really, I think, from my particular point of view, that we would do better if we could make those connections.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. Make it more of a streamlined connection.
Yeah. And when what you said earlier about having the, you know, children seeing their teacher writing, I think that's a big, like Marilyn said, they're afraid to share. You know, we have a lot of students who, you know, writing is terrifying for them, but they're going to have to teach it. You know, if you know, hopefully if you're a reading teacher, they love reading, but some don't. And the same with writing. So getting them comfortable with being writers themselves, you know, and whatever that means. That's
Right.
important, hugely important.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of, a functional problem that we're seeing where there's less writing in K-12, and then students coming into college get even less experience writing in their core classes in college. And then they come to their educator preparation program classes, and they really are very far removed from feeling like they're good writers or like they even want to write because they have so little experience or don't feel good about it. As nobody likes to do stuff they don't feel like they're good at.
This is one of the things I really like about the National Writing Project.
Yes, yeah.
It's they really emphasize teachers as part of the writing community in the classroom. And it's also a nice situation because people that are part of that participate in it, they're all interested in writing. So it's kind of a select group in one way. But on the other hand, what a great way to learn, because you have the opportunity to learn from your peers.
Exactly.
Which, we don't get enough opportunities. I mean, we often think about, pre-service instruction, but there's also what happens outside of the colleges in terms of both in-service and kind of our personal efforts to learn, which I think, when we ask teachers about their preparation, we always ask about pre-service, in-service, and personal. They tend to be much more positive about their personal and can cite a lot of different things that they've attended to when they rate that personal commitment higher. Now, they're not rating it all the way at the top of the end of the scale. Nobody seems to be doing that when it comes to writing, but they're not saying minimal either, which is where we often see teachers saying about their preparation.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at our questions to see. I feel like we've covered most of them. So anything else that you would like to?
Yeah, you haven't asked about the boogeyman in the room, so to speak. So I'd like to say a little bit about AI.
Oh yes, I was just about to bring it up a minute ago, and I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know.
No. It's good to bring up. So, in some ways, we've reacted to it like it's an existential threat.
Yeah.
And there are some threads of that. If you look in the world of business now, you're seeing ads, reports, etc., that AI is writing, and we will see more of that. Okay, that's not going to go away. It's not going to disappear. So what does this all mean for school? Well, I don't think it's a good idea if we have AI write our texts for us. Okay. So, there's an interesting study that I don't think's been released yet in terms of being peer reviewed out of Massachusetts. And it's with college students, but I think this applies equally well to any age students. And that is, if you have AI write for you versus you write the text or some in between, what you remember and what you learn is not very much from the AI text, because you haven't had to grapple with ideas and think about ideas. And so one of the things when we think about AI, there are things that it can do for us that we may find useful, but there are some aspects of what makes writing powerful that it cannot do for us. And one of those things is it can't help us, kind of intimately wrestle with ideas. Even something like, we often write about when we're having problems and stuff, and that serves a therapeutic role.
Yeah.
AI can't do that for us. And, I could keep kind of going down the line.
Yeah.
So I don't see AI making writing disappear per se, but I think we do want to put some parameters around AI use. Now, the extremes have been, we just ban it. We keep technology out of school. We have kids write in ways that they're only writing about personal experiences that they can know about. And then the other way is with just a free-for-all, let kids do what they want. Yeah. I think probably we need to be somewhere in the middle on this. And here's some rules that I would put around this. Yeah. One of the things is that we want, when we use AI as a writing partner, and that's the way I think of, like a writing buddy or a writing partner, we want to not minimize thinking. Okay, so that's not a surprise. I'm saying that given what I said before, but there has to be some flexibility around that. So let's say that you have a student who has severe motor difficulties, and he can generate using speech to text synthesis a number of ideas, and he uses AI to turn those into sentences. I'm okay with that. Now, thinking goes on at the sentence level. Don't get me wrong. You sometimes really clarify your ideas at that point, but that's a trade-off I'd be willing to make. But there's a lot of ways that we can use AI to increase our thinking. So, for example, I write something, I have AI through prompting, and students have to learn how to do this, create an outline of it for me. And then what I do is I look at that outline and I decide if that's what I really want. Would it be better if I changed? I could even ask AI for feedback on that.
Yeah.
Now, case, it increases the amount of thinking that I'm doing. So, get an added boost out of this.
Yes.
I think another thing that's important, that I'm fearful of is that people will think, okay, you got AI for a writing buddy. We don't need to teach writing anymore.
Oh, right.
I would argue that we need to spend more time teaching.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we're going to be asking kids to do things that they're not used to doing. Like, is that sentence saying what I meant when I'm the kid who has a motor challenge? That's not something kids are used to doing. And so, or looking at an outline of their text and deciding how they might change it. Yeah. So they're also not used to using a tool that they have to self-regulate themselves along with their own writing behaviors. And then the third thing that I would say is that it's fine if we use AI for the boring things in writing. We use spell checkers. We use spell checkers to get correct spelling, grammar checkers to help us with that. Well, why not? I don't see a problem with that. But where AI may be of the most use is for places that we have uncertainty.
Yeah.
So let's say that we are trying to think about an argument, related to, the westward movement. Okay. So, there's, at one time, like when I was in school as a 6 or 7 year old in the 1950s, the westward movement was viewed in a positive way. Now, we don't necessarily view Manifest Destiny in such a positive way anymore. But, it's a matter of viewpoint. It's a matter of the evidence that you bring to bear on it, etc. And so, for young kids, they may not be sure about this, and they could ask AI to generate several different competing, scenarios of this in terms of their arguments, and then turn around and ask AI to evaluate them. So in this case, it's gathering information and thinking about it, but it's on that uncertain part of writing. And I think that's one of the ways that we're going to find AI is going to be most helpful to us, is helping us deal with uncertainties. I mean, it'll always help with the mundane problems because it's well geared to that. But it's the thinking part that if we can make it help us think more broadly, more specifically, and better, that's an advantage to us. Now, I don't know that it's going to achieve that, but that's a possibility.
Yeah, only time will tell.
Right.
But I love the way, I love the way, and that's why I was like, oh, should I mention it or not? But I love the way you're framing it, because I think it's important that teachers and literacy educators, like I've messed around with it. So, but if we don't go in and play with it, then we're not going to understand how to use it, how to teach students how to use it. So if teachers are so against it, or professors or whoever, then, then it might be used in the wrong ways. So, so I plan on, with my classes saying, look, here's, and I did recently, I used it for something I was working on. I mean, I was, one of those days where I could not think. I could not make sense of what it is I wanted to say. So I asked AI to just give me some, like, I think you meant like organizational possibilities. How can I just threw a bunch of stuff at it. And I was like, I'm just curious what it's going to spit back. And it actually, I was shocked. It kind of led me in a new direction.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think it did the work for me. And it certainly, I didn't let it do the writing for me or the thinking. I gave it all the stuff, and it
Right.
just reconfigured it and gave it back to me. So, so I'm, you know, certainly open. I mean, it's there, it's out there. Our pre-service teachers are definitely using it, and I want them to use it the right way, and then use it the
Well,
right way.
they'll use it for their own instruction too, to enhance that.
Yeah.
We're doing a project with people in New York, and part of the thing is we have a number of lessons, probably about 140 lessons that's been developed. But when they access those, then they can also use AI to make them more interesting,
Yeah.
to modify them, etc. That's, in some ways, I think that's been one of the more exciting things I've seen, is when we talk to teachers. Teachers will often tell us of ways that they've used it that, you know, I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
in the classroom I would have, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the way you framed it as something additional that you're self-regulating outside of yourself. And I think that it's interesting to think of it that way, as not like a supplement or a substitute for thinking, but like a new way of thinking, metacognition, thinking about what you're thinking about, and having those, like you were saying too, writing those really good queries or prompts into AI and seeing how much it can, or ChatGPT, how much it can get to know you and the way you think. And it's really a new way of thinking. And I like the way you framed it as enhancing the way we can think. And it can, anyhow, if it's used the right way. Yeah.
But you have to learn to do that, and you have to have class and guidance. That's, you know, and I'm not sure that, you know, you'll have some teachers who are really tech savvy, right? Yeah. And some that are not. I own a flip phone, so I'm the least tech savvy person that you know. So the fact that I'm doing research on AI is kind of a miracle in and of itself. But it's intriguing. You know, it has possibilities. Yeah. It'd be great if the possibilities turn out in positive ways.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. It's so exciting. There's so much to, there's so much to think about. Writing, you know, it's been I've always been interested in it, and I loved when I was in the classroom and working with young children. We did writing workshop every day. My first grader, it was an hour. We spent an hour, and of course, in those days we could. It was, you know, we're talking 25 years ago, which we had that luxury. But wow, that was the key to my children who really struggled with print. That's what did it, was the writing. It was the writing. It was the composing, constructing a text on paper, sharing it with someone else. That was the aha,
magic.
The magic, moment. And that's what I try to get across to, you know, pre-service and in-service teachers I work with, is you need to harness that power. But it's, and it's so much fun too.
For sure.
It should be joyful, you know? Well, thank you so much, Dr. Graham. We so appreciate, we can't tell you how much we appreciate your time as furious readers of your work. We hope to speak with you again, or speak soon, and keep in touch with everything you're working on. And
well, thank you both, Bethany and Marilyn, for inviting me. I enjoyed it, and you guys have a good afternoon. Okay.
You too. Thank you.
Enjoy the heat.
Yes.